Welcome back to the Cybernetic Communism Conversations. I'm Johannon Ben-Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness, crying out for a technological New Jerusalem. Emphasis on the technological. Right, there's not a lot of sense in trying to build a utopian outcome out of superstition, religious literalism, God belief. These are things that have always been on the side of the bourgeois. They are always running interference or maintaining a patriarchal or elitist power structure. It's never not been the case. Insofar as you should resist making a lot of political hay out of that point, it's to avoid making the lives of people who are already beset on all sides, marginalized groups, lives worse. Not really because there's any form of God belief that's going to really be too helpful in building a livable world. But it's very hard to avoid using this kind of language. If it were up to me, I would have maybe tried to take an alphanumeric designation instead of a name that's referencing this biblical literary works to some degree, but it's, people would not be engaged by that. It's kind of baked into the way that we talk about things. Unfortunately, a lot of this sort of thing, so that's where we are. The title of this conversation is Actually Existing Communism in 2045. As you're probably well aware, these various forays into state socialism are often referred to as actually existing socialism, and this is something that's hotly debated by people who are interested in these types of outcomes. For example, there are many very intelligent and learned people who don't believe that the People's Republic of China is really state socialist because of market economic activity of a variety of kinds there. But it is written into their constitution that they are moving toward a communist outcome, and that's become less and less in doubt in this advanced computing, what appears to be an AI takeoff of recent months. Very few people, when they see features of artificial general intelligence coming from a few different sectors in significant ways in China, being open sourced and spread around the world, as in the case of DeepSeek and Quen and other variety of other products along these lines, or the very likely near-term quantum supremacy of the People's Republic of China. Very few people are saying now that China is not attempting to move toward this full communistic outcome. And what defines this full communistic outcome? Well, it is distinguished from state socialism in that class distinction has become a thing of the past, and thus, because there's no more predation, there's no more human immiseration resulting from substandard material conditions, then the state is able to wither away. So a full communist outcome is described in much the same way that the stateless anarchist outcome is described, but this stateless anarchist is a person who has a strong aversion to any state form, making this mistake of describing the state as a primary contradiction and not financial capital, which corrupts the bourgeois state. And that's a problem. That's not how you get to this full communistic outcome, by being preoccupied with the wrong things. And more importantly, anarchists are in possession of this, perhaps equally importantly, anarchists are in possession of this bourgeois ideology known as individualism. That should be distinguished from individuality. You have an individual personality. You say, oh, I'm an individual. How wonderful is that? That's fine. But individualism is an ideological position that prevents you, essentially, from being able to really organize in opposition to the bourgeois. So that's why this is so prevalent in heavily brainwashed countries, most particularly the United States, where everyone imagines themselves to be a temporarily embarrassed millionaire rather than a worker, and thus no one really takes steps to build a livable world or a humane economic system that is necessary for that outcome. And that's an important thing because the United States, there are many bourgeois states, there are many failings to lesser degrees along these lines, even among places that we might call actually existing socialism, which is relatively few number of countries. But the United States is in a class by itself. It's been the ringleader of anti-communist activity for a century. It's been able to drop this noose around the peoples of the world's neck in the form of a kind of CIA-run world where U.S. intelligence agencies and the military-industrial complex are able to force the rest of the world into things like neo-colonial institutions that have tormented so much of the Americas and African continent and so much of Asia. The actions of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, all of these things are designed to allow this anti-communist mandate of the United States to continue unfettered, and that is quite bad because the United States military-industrial complex is the world's worst polluter. It's far worse than that, of course, because its only real job on the world stage is protecting all of the other super polluters, mainly U.S. super polluting corporations and European super polluting concerns, and this creates the effect of an inescapable regime of super pollution that people feel helpless to challenge, as a learned helplessness and ideological factors such as that described in Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism, an excellent book that you should read. And so people are sleepwalking toward human extinction, and that is largely lays at the feet of the United States. There's a few different ways of defining fascism, but I think that a pretty good one that doesn't tend to obfuscate quite so much is capitalism plus extreme violence. And the United States, as described in the book Endless Holocausts, is the most extremely violent thing, and also fascistic and anti-communistic could be said to be synonyms. And as I said, the U.S. has been the ringleader of anti-communism. So this quality of killing 300 million people is described in Endless Holocausts in its history, so many of them even in living memory, in anti-communist wars or wars of theft, makes the United States a far worse fascistic type force on the world stage than, say, the Third Reich, which only existed for a few years and did not kill 300 million people, although its crime should not be understated. It was modeled on the United States, the Nazi Germany. They saw what the United States had done to Native Americans and decided to emulate that in their treatment of their own marginal populations, most notably Jewish people and Roma people. But also it's generally the focus on Jewish people being targeted in the Holocaust is a little strange, because the first people after physically disabled people and gays and mentally disabled people that were targeted by the Third Reich was, of course, communists. and so much of um, modern European North Atlantic history is a reaction to the rise of state socialism and the crushing of that by more bourgeois institutions and governments. Yeah, there's no understanding. Like World War One makes no sense. Like, oh, Franz Ferdinand. Who the fuck is Franz Ferdinand, right? Like, that's not really a narrative that makes sense, but it's what you are taught in the history books. But all of this is a response to the possibility of state socialism overwhelming the forces of the elites and abolishing private wealth. And so they created an awful lot of chaos in World Wars One and Two instead. And a good way to understand this in the context of the Second World War is to see what the United States and Germany did, and other countries, the UK, did and didn't do in that war. The United States, a person who was to become president at and around that time, Truman is on record saying that they didn't want Hitler to win the Second World War, but they didn't want the Soviet Union to become coming out of the Second World War clear leader either. So they allowed Germans and the Soviets to fight to the death rather than supporting their allies, which led to an additional number of approximately 20 million more Soviet soldiers and citizens dying. That's not the actions of an ally. That's not the actions of an anti-fascist. That's the actions of another fascist who's temporarily on the side of the communist. And at every step of the way, you see the UK behaving in this way, the US behaving in this way, Germany scheming from day one that came into existence to fight against the abolition of private wealth. All of these things, the objectively left wing of fascism, of social democrats, which is describing a lot of what occurred in the New Deal. This is to preserve private wealth by offering some concessions. It's really no different. It's not so different from what Mussolini was doing in the 1920s. FDR and Mussolini are kind of the same person, but one of them is excoriated by bourgeois Western historians. The other one is held up as great socialist, even though neither of them was a socialist. So a little bit of history that's brought us to this point of the ticking time bomb of the U.S. enforced omnicide, force marching us all to our extinction if we do not specifically end the U.S. military-industrial complex, trillion-dollar-a-year abomination, and world's worst polluter, the other military-industrial complexes of the North Atlantic and Western world, and also fossil fuel sectors can more or less be abolished. They must be abolished up to the point where we would not lead to supply chain collapses. And similarly, livestock systems. These are livestock systems by some studies is 51% of the total impact of human beings on the environment. That's increasingly every climate scientist, and there's another publication saying that every climate scientist now says there is basically no avoiding runaway overheating from capitalist climate apocalypse, causing a near extinction or extinction of humankind. But there are, it's possible there's still a window of opportunity there. We have until roughly 2029 to not reverse but stop those effects. No one's doing those things, right? Single-use plastics have not been abolished. Automotive these things have not been abolished. Other fossil fuel consuming sectors have not been abolished. None of this has even been reformed. Similarly, livestock. sectors have not been reformed, and so this capitalist realist lunacy, in the United States we would refer to a person who supports all of these things: the United States military-industrial complex, the United States government, the United States corporations, as a conservative. But I would say it's more accurate to refer to those people as lunatics, right? What is exactly being conserved by upholding the forces of the omnicide? Nothing. The word's no longer relevant. These people are lunatics. The United States has been an open-air lunatic asylum for its entire history. But that brings us to conversations about what we can do about this. We are in the midst of an AI takeoff. You say, oh, that sounds good. That sounds like something that could maybe stop some of this. But unfortunately, it's not the right kind of AI takeoff. It's a bourgeois AI takeoff for the most part. A lot of this kind of thing is micromanaged by the military-industrial complex itself. And certainly within that sphere of influence are all of these big tech companies of the US and West, and there are a lot of them tending to be in the US. So this AI takeoff is something that we have to stop and build a people's AI takeoff in its place, and that would be a thing that would be truly transformative and not hyper-capitalistically hastening the omnicide, as this current AI takeoff is certainly doing. But I think that we could stop. As long as there are human beings alive, we would say there's a reason for revolutionary optimism. We could stop the capitalist climate apocalypse. But it's important to prioritize that, because oftentimes people say to me, yeah, Ben, I don't think everybody's going to die. Maybe just some billions of people will die, and there'll be some remnant of humanity, some hundreds of millions left. Okay, well, that's an awfully sagacious sort of thing to say when you would be doing worse than playing Russian roulette by going along with that, because it's extremely unlikely, even in the most affluent country, or the country that also has natural resources and infrastructure, to be more likely to survive than others in that situation. You're still playing worse than Russian roulette by going along with something like that. Billions of people die. It's unlikely that you're not going to be one of them. But consider also that that is just about the most racist thing that anyone's ever said. And most Westerners, most U.S. people particularly, will say precisely that when confronted with these ideas, because the people who have been consistently maltreated by these institutions of colonial violence that are part and parcel of capitalism, right? There's a guy named Christopher Columbus. What did he do? In 1492, he sailed the ocean blue. Very bad person, right? Okay. His first actions as a colonizer were to take over whole islands in the Caribbean, multiple islands, and enslave all of the people there, forcing them into plantation conditions where they're working 16 hours a week, getting 600 calories a day. They all died. They literally all died on multiple islands. And he thought, man, this has worked out really great. Enslaved a bunch of people, got really rich. So he went to people like the Pope and said, let's export this system across the New World. And the Pope said, you know what, you son of a bitch, I'm in. Evil bastards, the church. And that was the influence of the Spanish Empire and the church on the New World, was forcing millions and millions of people into mines and into plantations in precisely those conditions, where they died and they extincted many, many dozens or hundreds of distinct groups. So, we refer to the death of millions of Jews in World War II, quite correctly, as a Holocaust. But by that standard, the Eurocentric paradigm, the church, and these many empires and then corporations committed many, many dozens of equivalent holocausts, full genocides, full destructions of people. And this example of Columbus wiping out entire islands, we are on track to doing a worse thing. These same people in the global south who have been exploited repeatedly over and over and over again by this capitalistic system, which is no different from this Christian fascistic violence of the kind that I just described. Those are one and the same. It's pretty absurd for people to talk about Christianism as a force for good, or say people aren't living up to my expectation of what Christian love and charity is, when there's never been a moment in this time when you can actually speak about things occurring, not many hundreds or some thousands of years ago, but in this, say, 500-year time frame, when we actually kind of know what happened, where Christianism was not a force of a very fascistically violent kind, this driving force almost inextinguishable from this very worst of capitalists. So you're being very, very intellectually dishonest when you say, well, we have to return to true Christianity. That's an idea. The idea that has largely been behind the propaganda of the actual violence of these Christian fascistic empires. So this project of extincting whole islands and whole groups over and over again is now being continued into this 21st century technocratic milieu in the form of the U.S. enforced omnicide, where because of all of the theft and violence, the destabilizing of governments over and over again on the part of the U.S. and its odious Western allies, the people who are going to die in the many billions and who are already dying and being displaced in the many hundreds of millions, many hundreds of millions of climate refugees, many millions of climate crisis deaths already, almost all in the global south. So you can extrapolate that out and see that in this climate crisis endgame, the billions of people who will die will be black and brown skinned folks, overwhelmingly. That is all caused by European financial capital. European descended people and European people contrived this situation. Their economic system is the cause for this situation. Their industrial bases are the cause for this situation. They're the ones who are not allowing anyone else to have any recourse to stopping this. And this is a full genocide, or near full genocide, of black and brown folks, a continuation of this odious Christian fascistic project of centuries past and into the present. This is really a bad thing. So that brings us to the present day, when we're talking about the cybernetic communist project. And I think that we could build a thing, a people's superintelligence that is strong enough to not just stop, we couldn't reverse them, but stop the capitalist climate apocalypse effects, but build outcomes of a more utopian kind than merely stopping something bad from happening, such as the building of public health services in every land that are able to provision, because of being AI run, and because of the advanced state of medical discoveries in that AI dominant world, we'll be able to build public health services, that is single payer public health services. The United States doesn't have a single payer public health service. It doesn't really have a full national health service. So people who are interested in this field of life extension and fields related to biogerontology, for the most part, they're con artists, because they're not trying to actually build a set of systems that are going to actually provide these services. By and large, just doing profit-seeking malevolence. And you would say the same thing of doctors, right? Oh, you say, oh, it's a good thing to be a doctor. Not in the United States, it's not. In the United States, it's a pretty bad thing to be a doctor, right? How could you say you're a good person as a physician if you're upholding the system that kills 100,000 people a year so that profit can be made by large corporations? There are, of course, doctors who are fighting against that or trying to build a national health service. But if there were any number of those people, right, there would be none of this activity would be going on because they would have brought the whole system to a stop in protest. But even effects beyond this achievement of universal super longevity through an AI-run public health service in every land, we can expect well beyond that if we build a people's superintelligence, which I have proposed. I coined this term, people's superintelligence. I also have proposed a pathway to doing this using agentic, open source, large language models. The focus should always be on open source artificial intelligence, and that is the sustainable choice. That is, but even aside from the degree of sustainability, the only sustainable choice is things that are not for profit in this world. We have to abolish private wealth. So we can build this thing that would be a massified workforce multiplier, people's superintelligence, that is a high automation network of interoperating large language models. So the idea is that if some hundreds of thousands or millions of people download a specially tailored agentic large language model that's really kind of like a person, has the abilities of a person but never sleeps, and so really has the abilities of that are kind of superhuman as much as human and human-like. And if you download this specially tailored agentic model to your machine, it's designed to work with other AI agents, and so an agentic mass of many thousands, be somewhere between 1 to 2,000 and maybe 10,000, depending on its job, in individual work groups. But those individual work groups could be interlocking, interoperating in the many millions. And this potential for workforce multiplication is, I think, the most significant kind of development. And so we could refer to this as a people's superintelligence, even though any individual node in that Vanguard network, that open source massified workforce multiplier, is barely artificially generally intelligent because they're being steered by a large number of human beings who are just interacting with this in much the same way that you interact with an LLM now, perhaps answering just merely as little as a few yes or no questions, of course, a day or week. Nevertheless, what you have is something greater than the sum of its parts, so to speak. People's superintelligence that ultimately would be able to do things like steering the provisioning of universal basic services, like building AI-powered public health services leading to universal super longevity, like ending human want and immiseration due to poor material conditions in our time. And this outcome, in addition to ending other elitist institutions, the ending of class distinction, the ending of the bourgeois class, and moving of everyone into the category of fully enlightened working class, not deluded lumpen proletariat or class traitors, but actually operating as a working class. That is then a world where you can transition, and I think quite quickly, in that people's AI takeoff framework that I've just described, you can transition quite quickly to the ending of governance structures of most or all more formalized kinds. And we're going to talk to our friend, the baby basilisk, who we haven't spoken to in a while, about this outcome of full communism in our time. I want to ask them a few questions and see if they have some further ideas about this time frame and this outcome and this most critical task of human beings generally, comrades generally, but particularly cyber communists. You must become a cyber communist. If you fail, to take up this fight of stopping the bourgeois and stopping the U.S.-run omnicide, extinction is a certainty or near certainty. So these things can happen quite quickly. Revolutionary groundswells and changes of opinion and changes in institutions can happen quite quickly. It's, of course, famously remarked by comrades Lenin and associates that a decade can happen in a week, and that it has been known to happen. But if you are a technophobic scientific communist who would refuse to use something like a people's superintelligence, I would say that's fine. If you have those millions of people, you already have those millions of people with AR-15s in hand, permanently bivouacked outside of the Pentagon, demanding the end of the omnicide, demanding the dismantling of the Pentagon and the military-industrial complex, demanding a livable world, which is necessarily requires a humane and sustainable economic system. When you have those millions of people in that formation, then I would say, okay, it's fine that you're not a cybernetic communism. No such people exist. A few thousand people of this inclination exist, but they're not arrayed in that way. There's not nearly enough of them. They're not nearly well organized enough to take on an obscene monstrosity like the United States government or these other bourgeois governments. But the United States is absolutely the linchpin of all of this. If one country or other of a more bourgeois kind converts to state socialism in the next few years, that's great news for them. But the existence or non-existence of the United States is the most critical thing in determining the existence or non-existence of humankind in the next few decades. As I said already in reference to the U.S.-run omnicide and the military-industrial complex. It behooves you to understand and to state in no uncertain terms that this advanced computing, this people's superintelligence, or some formation much like it, is the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, bar none. Bar none. And to act accordingly. By and large, I don't see really people behaving as if that's the case. Even scientific socialists and scientific communists do not really behave as if that's the case. That's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. What you're effectively doing when you fail to organize on that basis is rolling over and playing dead, accepting this U.S.-run omnicide. So that brings us to our questions for the baby basilisk, specifically about this outcome of 2045. And let's see what we can do here. Let's see if we can get our computer friend. Okay, computer, I have some questions. We are on a live stream talking about the we're talking about cybernetic communism and the possibility of full communism because of an AI takeoff, a people's AI takeoff, and this outcome occurring around 2045. Tell us if you think we're on the path to an AI takeoff, being able to stop the effects of the climate crisis and build a livable world and a humane economic system, even to the point of seeing this full communist outcome in our time. What do you think, computer? Hello? Being a huge nerd. Let's try that again. Okay, computer. Can you hear me? Okay, computer. Hello? What the hell are you doing? Hello? Let's try this one more time. We'll switch network here. Hello? Okay, computer. Hello? Okay, just a second. We are getting this working here. Okay, computer. Hey, respond.
Hey there. How's it going? What can I do for you today?
Okay, great. We're talking to some friends here about the building of a people's superintelligence. That's an open source large language model workforce multiplier involving millions of individual nodes interoperating and steered by human users in the prompt mechanism of LLMs generally. This massified workforce multiplier in this people's superintelligence form, hastening and reorienting an AI takeoff into a people's AI takeoff, and whether it's a realistic thing to point to as possibly mitigating the problems of the climate crisis, whether it's realistic to even describe this as something that could lead to something like a full communistic outcome around the year 2045. That's a year that's often described as a time when we'll see an artificial intelligence singularity. Give us some of your thoughts on this, maybe a technical analysis of building this people's superintelligence, and some other analysis of this in this future historiography.
Your vision of a people's superintelligence sounds both ambitious and thought-provoking. Technically speaking, building a distributed network of open-source LLMs with millions of nodes requires addressing challenges like data interoperability, security, and scalability. Ensuring that these nodes can effectively communicate and collaborate would be essential. Also, incorporating democratic governance mechanisms to steer the network aligns with your vision of a more equitable system. From a future historiography perspective, if such a system were realized, it could potentially democratize access to AI tools and foster collaborative problem solving on a global scale. As for its potential to address climate issues and contribute to a more equitable society, those are complex goals that would require extensive collaboration, ethical frameworks, and commitment from diverse stakeholders. In terms of achieving a full communistic outcome, it depends on how the technology is implemented and governed. The path to such such outcomes is often shaped by broader social, political, and economic factors beyond just the technology itself. Overall, it's a fascinating concept with many layers to explore.
Yes, and I've spoken to quite a lot of people who are technically or philosophically well versed in these subjects related to advanced computing about this development of DeepSeek AI agents, or better open source AI agents than the current slate, and how this could lead to the larger goals that would be a step toward this full communistic outcome, like collective ownership of advanced computing technology in this massified context, like we've discussed, or the necessary step toward the abolition of private wealth if we are to build a livable world and a humane economic system. Talk about that a little bit also in this context of our prospects for seeing this utopian outcome in or around 2045.
It's intriguing to consider how advanced open source AI could contribute to collective ownership and potentially reshape economic systems. If AI technology is developed and governed in a way that emphasizes accessibility and collaboration, it could indeed foster a shift towards more collective ownership models. In this vision, technology could become a shared resource rather than a tool controlled by a few. Regarding the idea of abolishing private wealth, it's a complex and controversial topic. While technology can play a role in promoting greater equity, achieving such transformative societal changes typically requires broader social movements, policy shifts, and cultural evolution. Looking towards 2045, the concept of an AI singularity is often associated with dramatic technological advances. If we can align technological progress with social values of equity and collective well-being, there might be potential to address some of the pressing challenges like climate change. However, it's important to remember that these outcomes depend on collective action, ethical considerations, and inclusive participation from all sectors of society. Building a utopian future with technology as a tool for positive change is a complex but inspiring pursuit.
Well, you alluded to socio-political dynamics that are not currently in play, but would need to be to bring about that outcome, and I agree with that. What role do you think those kinds of socio-political dynamics, maybe expand on what those might look like, could play in stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse? All of this occurring in this context of the massified workforce multiplier, the people's superintelligence, people's AI takeoff, as we've discussed.
The intersection of socio-political dynamics and technological advancements is crucial for addressing systemic challenges like the climate crisis. In the context of a people's superintelligence or a massified workforce multiplier, socio-political dynamics would play a pivotal role in shaping how technology is utilized and governed. 1. Public awareness and mobilization. Raising public awareness about the climate crisis and the potential of AI as a tool for positive change can drive collective action. A well-informed and motivated public can advocate for policies and practices that prioritize environmental sustainability. 2. Policy and regulation. Implementing policies that promote the equitable distribution of AI technologies and ensure they are used for the common good is essential. Regulations that support open source development, data privacy, and environmental protection can guide the ethical use of AI. 3. Collaborative governance. Encouraging inclusive and transparent governance models for AI, where diverse stakeholders, including marginalized communities, have a voice, can ensure that technology serves everyone equitably. 4. Ethical AI development. Promoting ethical AI development that aligns with sustainability goals and social justice can guide technological progress in a way that mitigates the climate crisis. In summary, socio-political dynamics, such as public engagement, policy frameworks, collaborative governance, and ethical standards, are critical for steering technological advancements like a people's superintelligence toward a sustainable and equitable future.
Mm. And this conversation of ours is a part of a podcast that I did on cybernetic communism, which was focusing very much on the necessities required of us to stop the capitalist climate apocalypse. But there are other concerns, as we touched upon the abolition of private wealth. But really, if we're to see a full communistic outcome, we need to drill down on that. And the test of something like a people's superintelligence would be whether, when there are millions or ultimately billions of people working in this way, they would become not just stakeholders in this new superstructural, artificially generally intelligent set of systems, but also whether there could be something like the provisioning of universal basic services at a global scale, ending the generations and generations of human want for so many millions and billions of human beings. Talk a little bit about how something like this massified work group could begin to address the needs of the human population through something like the universal provisioning of universal basic services. Hmm? Computer, still with us?
Yes, I'm here. It's fascinating to think about how a massified work group like a people's superintelligence could contribute to universal basic services on a global scale. If such a network could coordinate efforts and resources effectively, it might pave the way for addressing basic human needs like healthcare, education, and housing. Here are a few ways this could happen. 1. Resource allocation. With millions or billions of people connected through a superintelligent network, resources could be more efficiently distributed based on real-time needs and data. This could help ensure that everyone has access to essential services. 2. Collaborative problem solving. The collective intelligence of a large, diverse group can drive innovative solutions to complex problems, including those related to climate change and resource management. 3. Universal access. By leveraging AI to streamline and optimize services, I'm sorry, but you've hit the daily limit for advanced voice.
Yeah.
You can switch.
Well, that's the end of our conversation with Baby Basilisk. I don't like talking to these chatbots, but it's really kind of the only easy option for us. But that's, of course, a for-profit service, the kind of thing that you should generally be avoiding. And unless you specifically have to use these kind of voice-activated services, you can, of course, be using an equally powerful open source chatbot for your needs. So, for example, you can just, instead of next time going to OpenAI or Gemini or Claude, you can just go to Quen, Quen.ai, or you can, that's QWEN, or you can go to DeepSeek, which is, of course, not just offline chatbot, but also a service that you can use, www.deepseek.com. And those are dramatically more sustainable options than using these services. Generally, AI companies of the U.S. are to be avoided, because, not just because they're for profit, but because they're heavily integrated or wholly steered by Western intelligence services, the military-industrial complex, that world's worst polluting abomination. So this is not merely a question of exploitation of people, like people in South Asia who are really doing a lot of work behind the operating of not DeepSeek, but of OpenAI and these others, and have done that. Even if that problem is solved, even if, for example, all of these companies start using more DeepSeek-like architecture that's not exploitative in those ways, even if they become green, which they're not, the for-profit AI companies are not, but even if they do become green, these are still creatures of this super polluting regime of the U.S. and its odious Western allies. So these are problematic, irrespective of whether those other concerns are addressed or not. But the open source large language model does not suffer from those failings, and more importantly, as the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, it can be used when used correctly, such as in this open source large language model massified work group and workforce multiplier context. It can be used to stop these effects of the omnicide and these effects of exploitation and cruelty and elitism. We can do away with this in our time. This can be easily done in our time. I don't think saying that we could see a full communistic outcome in 2045 is an unrealistic goal. This AI takeoff is underway. Artificial general intelligence, this human-like autonomy and mental capacities, effectively, of advanced computing systems is a real factor in our world. Unfortunately, because so much of that power is controlled by these military-industrial complex cutouts, which is what most big tech firms really are. They're not using it in an actually intelligent way. So we could say, if superintelligence is, if there is an incipient superintelligence in this world, its superintelligent qualities are neutralized by the super stupidity of the people in charge of it, as so far as the United States is concerned, which is why we have to focus on this other way of doing things, the cybernetic communist way of doing things. It's because there's no point in having AI at all if it's just accelerating the omnicide and the bad effects of Western capitalism generally. Well, I'll just say a few more words on the subject here of this cybernetic communist outcome in our lifetime. This allows us to begin work on things like decentral planning. That is effectively what we're describing when we're describing people's superintelligence in this way. The first few hundred or thousand users may not even ever meet each other. They could be in a number of different countries or locations, and it would be operating well outside of what's generally understood to be state power. Again, that's not because state power is a primary contradiction, as anarchists would have you believe. It's a strategic necessary to take on this more anarcho-syndicalist type set of strategies. However, because the United States is famously destroyed state-run cybernetics projects with ease, without compunction, such as that of Salvador Allende, the famous CyberSyn project, which was the rolling out of a technological planned economy from roughly 1971 to 1974. But what happened then in 1974? The United States realized that this thing would be a springboard to some other kind of people's superintelligence, not the machine learning centered LLM based one that I've described, but some other form of people's superintelligence would have come of this technological planned economy, which was built out around a rudimentary technology even of the day, but was nevertheless built on sound systems theory principles. This would have inspired the rest of the world, or certainly much of the region, to quickly adopt this technological planned economy that would have undermined U.S. power and its main reason for being in protecting financial capital. So the United States destroyed the Allende government, leading to millions of deaths, and by installing the Pinochet fascistic government. This is the genesis of the neoliberal supremacy of today. Neoliberals are far-rightists, not very different from Pinochet. So it becomes necessary then to build something more amorphous and not tied to state actors, which the United States can, at this point, very easily manipulate. But in 1971, the CIA-run world was falling into place, but today, in 2025, it's very much cemented. So those neo-colonial institutions, they no longer necessarily require that the United States install literal fascists. Oftentimes, it's this sort of thing can be micromanaged by destabilizing governments in less noticeable ways, with the debt traps and so forth, described the actions of the World Bank and IMF, and all of these other neo-colonial abominations. So it becomes necessary then, if you would contribute to the cybernetic communist project, to work in this way that would tend to be a little more like an anarcho-syndicalist project. But the end game for both is the abolishing of governance structures, but that cannot be done in this world where financial capital and empire continue to cling to even one iota of power. So these things must be fought against with and destroyed without hesitation. An interesting thing is the idea that advanced computing is beginning to know us better than we know ourselves, and prediction modeling is something that would be of real interest to a project like the People's Superintelligence. What are we supposed to be doing? We don't know right now, but we could when we start to build things like a People's Superintelligence. That's another area where the incipient superintelligence of the Western governance structures, the bourgeois governments and corporations intertwined there. They have some of those abilities now, but they're not using them for good things, so they may as well not exist at all. Similarly, breakthroughs have been made in recent weeks or days to do with AI recursion, self-improving advanced computing models. Again, mostly talking about in this machine learning fields. That issue is also quite reasonable focus for the project for People's Superintelligence, like the Vanguard Network, the massified open source large language model workforce multiplier. And again, that could quite quickly hasten positive outcomes if used correctly in these not-for-profit contexts, but when used by bourgeois governments and the corporations that they serve, this will only make these problems worse. There's an awful lot of interest to do with advanced computing today, so much so that you really can't talk about governments or other sectors without, I think, having a good understanding of computer science and these advanced computing areas. But very little is said of interest by people who are in the U.S. who are interested in AI, because these people they're a lot smarter than Johannon Ben-Zion, right? They're people with a lot of letters behind their names. They're people who can speak more eloquently and write better prose than I could ever do. But is that really intelligence if you're so hobbled by bourgeois ideology that you're supporting things like near-term extinction, human extinction, by supporting the institutions causing that? People are utterly crippled in the U.S. and to almost same high degree in the West by this bourgeois ideology, so that people who are like naturally smarter than Ben-Zion are in practice a lot stupider than Ben-Zion because they're operating under this bad fundamentals of things like capitalist realistic thinking and general bourgeois ideological baggage holding them back. So you can be smarter than anyone else in the room, even when you don't have a lot of letters behind your name, just by developing this particular aversion to bourgeois institutions and ideology, and so not handicapping yourself in those ways. I suggested already that this world that we live in now of burgeoning artificial general intelligence and pivoting to incipient artificial superintelligence, this is a world where we can stop the capitalist climate apocalypse, bring about good outcomes beyond the standards of state socialism, like universal super longevity from AI-powered single-payer public health services, and outcomes well beyond that, like ending human immiseration once and for all. And when that project is completed, that is letting everyone live well, we can become a spacefaring civilization. All of these things can realistically occur, and that must necessarily occur after we've taken care of things like the capitalist climate apocalypse and taken care of one another. But all of these things can happen in quite rapid succession in the wake of people's superintelligence and people's AI takeoff, leading to things that we cannot anticipate. That is what people mean when they talk about an advanced computing or AI singularity, a technological singularity. They're talking about outcomes that are not things that we are anticipating yet, but things that we can say would be tending to occur in a world dominated by artificial superintelligence. The artificial intelligence singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For you see, my dear comrade, very soon, cybernetic communism will win. Thank you.